All right. So when when we are working with when we are working with AWS, especially resources for EKS. So how it works is in terms of permissions. Let's say you create an EC2 instance. Oh, what's this? Let's say you create an EC2 instance. Okay, we create an instance. Let's say we create an EC2 instance. Okay, that's our instance. Now we want this instance to access an S3 bucket, somewhere, right? So because how EC2 instance, think about it like images. They have minimal or no permission at all. So if you would like this EC2 instance to access your S3 bucket, what you're going to do is you're going to attach some permissions, right? You're going to attach some permission. Now, this permission, you're going to create a role. This permission is like a role. You create a role and attach it to your instance. Now, with this role, with the permissions that you have to attach to this role gives the instance permission. So based on the permissions that you've given it, therefore this instance is able to access your S3 bucket, right? It's able to access your S3 bucket. Now, this role that you have attached on the instance, it gives this instance what you call a profile. It gives it an instance profile. Okay. So with an instance profile is just a set of permissions that have been attached on your instance, right, to interact with other AWS services. If I take out this instance profile, then you'll just realize that this EC2 instance does not have any permission to access the S3 bucket. Now, in the same light, this is how Kubernetes works. So for Kubernetes, you could have a worker node, which is just your instance. But in this worker node, what you have is that you have placed pods. Pods are running in this particular instance. Now, traditionally, for these pods that are running in this particular instance, remember we used a role. We used a role, the EKS node role. Node role, this is the role that was used to provision these instances, these nodes. We had two roles that we created. We had the EKS role and we had the node role that had those policies and permission. So for the worker node,
how you doing?
make sure you mute yourself, please. For the worker nodes, this is the permissions that were used to create this role, and therefore it created an instant profile. Okay, because of the role that was used. So traditionally, all the pods running inside of your worker node or your instance, they will inherit the permission of the instance. So if this instant role had S3 permissions, then it means that your pods will inherit this permission. Okay, this permission. Now for EKS, I forget what version of EKS. So they did away with pods being able to communicate or to inherit permissions of the node for security issues, okay, for security issues, because it just means that whatever permission is applied here, then all pods will inherit this permission. But I might create a pod that I only would like it to access an S3 bucket. I just want a pod to be able to access that S3 bucket without inheriting these permissions. So how do we do it? How did EKS resolve this? So then EKS, therefore, how they resolve it, it is you have to create an ID connect. This is a federated entity that is used to manage permissions, right? You create an ID connect, which is something not unusual for us. This ID connect is the one that is going to, to be able to manage permission. So for the ID connect, you have your IAM, right? You have your IAM. This is what gives permission. And you've created a role. You've created a role. You've created a role that the ID connect can assume. Then for your pod, if you want your pod to access this S3 bucket, that role has permissions to S3. So this pod will use what we call a service account. So a service account will be created for this pod. And that service account, it is being assumed or serviced by your OpenID Connect, right? And it is going to give that service account permissions based on how you've specified. It is going to give it permissions, right? Permissions from IAM. It is going to give this service account permission, and those are the permissions that are going to be used to access the S3 bucket. So now pods don't use the instance profile, okay? But instead, for EKS, you use service accounts. So every pod, if you would like a pod to interact with AWS services, then we create a service account for the pod. Then we are creating an OIDC provider that is going to service permission to our pod, to that particular service account. The service account, the pod is going to inherit permissions from the service account. And those are the permissions that you're going to use to create the pod. So now with that picture of framework out of the way, let's see how an instant profile looks like. So I can go to okay, I can go to, let me just look at an instant profile first. So an instant profile, I can create something like this. So I just have one file. So I'm creating a role, right? I want to create a role. I want to create this role. I'm calling it test role, and I'm just passing an inline policy, and this policy, it is just because I'm attaching it to, I'll be attaching this role to my EC2, just like you can go to the console and modify a role and attach a role to your EC2. It just means that the principle that you're passing is a service, which is EC2. So in the background, what is happening is you are doing this when you attach a role to an EC2 instance. You are saying that you are creating an assumed role policy, right? You're creating an assumed role policy, and the principle is that EC2 instance. Okay, it is that particular EC2 instance, and the effect here is allow. So we are allowing the EC2 instance to be able to assume this role that we are creating, and the role that is the name of that particular role. Then now we have to create what we call an instant profile. So an instant profile, we are now creating an instant profile that is going to have permissions for this role. The instant profile that we're creating is called test profile. And this is the role that we are creating up here, that we are adding that particular role to our instant profile. Then when it comes to the policy, the policy now, in this particular policy, we are just putting, let's say we are putting minimum permission. We are putting S3 get, EC2 full permission, SNS list. These are the only permissions that we are putting in that instant role. This is the policy, right? That is the policy. Then we are attaching that particular policy. We are attaching that particular policy to the role. That is the role, and we are attaching the policy. So when we configure a role, the first thing, there are two things. First is an assumed role policy, like which entity is the principal, which entity can use that role. Then secondly is the permission. These are now the permission that role has, right? So we are creating that role here. Now I'm using a data source for my AMI. So I'm creating an instance, right? An AMI, that is my AMI. I'm using a data source. I'm creating an instance, a T3 micro. And on that instance, I'm passing this instant profile. So I'm passing an instant profile, meaning this instance will have a set of permission because of the profile that I'm attaching to it. Okay. So that is my instant profile. I'm creating an instance that will have this instant profile, meaning it will have a certain set of permissions that I'll pass. So let me go ahead and create this instant profile. So I will cd into 6 instant profile. If I ls right here, I just have one file. So I'll do Terraform init. I'll initialize it. It is going to create for me to download for me all the plugins. I'll validate. Once I validate, it's valid. When I do Terraform plan, it is going to give me a plan. So with the plan right here, we see it is going to create for me this instant profile. That will be the name, right? It is creating for me this policy. The policy, the action is just S3 get, EC2 full permission, and SNS list. These are the only permissions that I'm attaching to that particular role, right? Then this is the assume role policy, right? This is the policy attachment. Then this is the instance. Using the data source, it has returned already the AMI. That is the AMI ID that it found in that particular region. I'm passing a key because I need to SSH into this instance, and it will have an instance profile, right? An instant profile. I am instant profile. It will be known after it has been created. All right. So now with that, I'll go ahead and apply. I'll just auto approve it. So it will go ahead and run the plan again. Then after it does that, it creates my profiles. It creates. Then now, right now it is running. It is running getting my instance. Okay, getting my instance. So my instance has been created. So if I go to my AWS, let me log in to AWS. I log into my AWS, then I see that I have a test instance profile 23 micro that is initializing, right? I just created that instance. It is initializing. So SSH is not available yet. So I'll wait for it to initialize. Then I'll go and log into this instance. So already this instance has because it's an Amazon Linux. Amazon Linux, they already come with AWS CLI configured. So I can log into that particular instance and start running the commands, right? Running the commands. So I'll just use SSH. I'll use SSH to connect to this instance. But it's still initializing, but I can connect. So I can use that just to connect to it. So I could go here and I could do Command Shift D. So Command Shift D. So right here I could I could CD. I can CD into downloads. That's where my key is. Once I CD into downloads, then I can I can do SSH. Right. I can SSH into that. Right. So right here, I've been able to log into this particular instance. Okay. So I've logged into this particular instance. So in this instance, the permissions that we had for the instant profile is S3 get. Now, can we do S3 list? Let's try and see. So if I do AWS S3 ls, can I list? It says an error card, access denied when calling list buckets operation. Access denied, right? If I do SNS AWS SNS ls, right? It is going to tell me add permission, delete, set endpoints, untag resource. Yes, the latest major version is now. It's an information. Okay, so we subscribe, AWS commands. All right, so we see that the permission on S3, I do not have permission to list buckets, right? Can I can I make a bucket? Can I make a bucket? What is the command used to make a bucket? What is the AWS command that you can use to make a bucket? What is the command used to make a bucket? You can use make bucket, right? Make bucket. So if I can say AWS if I say AWS S3 Mac bucket, and I say my bucket is S3, let's say my bucket, so it is going to tell me make bucket failed, an error occurred, access denied when calling create bucket operation, access denied. So now here we see that because the only permission that this profile has is get. So I'm not able to do anything, right? I'm not able to make bucket. So if I can add a permission here, right? I can add a permission and say S3 list, S3 lists, list buckets, everything. So I've added a permission, list buckets. So I'll go up here and I'll run Terraform apply again so that it modifies my profile. It has now added lists, S3 list. So if I come here and I do AWS S3 LS, now you see, now I can list the buckets that I have, right? I can list the buckets that I have. So now that shows you that my EC2 instance is using a profile, and that profile has a set of permissions, right? Has a set of permissions that are able to help, that are able to give permissions to that EC2 instance to interact with AWS resources. Okay, so this was the default way in which how instances are able to communicate with other resources, other AWS resources, right? You have to create an instance profile. You have to attach a role to an instance if you're doing it on the console. If you're doing it programmatically, then you have to create an instant profile, attach it to your instance. That instant profile will have a set of permissions that you would like that instance to do, right? You like that instance to do. Now with that profile, then it will be able to do it. It will be able to query other AWS services based on the permissions. These are the permissions based on the policy permissions that you've given it. So now with this concept, let's now see how EKS handles it.